Michael Jackson, the timeless symbol of global music, did more than mesmerize audiences with sound and movement. He also carried an intensely private world that sparked endless curiosity. Beyond the spotlight lies a lesser-discussed chapter, one shaped by discrete emotional bonds with 6 well-known artists, kept far from public view. These connections reveal a quieter, more human dimension of the legend, offering depth beyond the image history chose to frame. Step behind the curtain to uncover the subtle, emotional echoes hidden beneath the brilliance of the stage. In that era, embracing one's full emotional truth was almost unthinkable for a world-famous artist navigating both immense fame and constant scrutiny. One former collaborator once recalled a quiet memory. There were nights in the hotel when he would sit in stillness for hours, saying almost nothing. He whispered, "Freddie's voice feels like my own thoughts, unfiltered, restless, yet strangely beautiful. It's not about possession, but about a connection that makes you feel less alone." In moments like these, Michael seemed to reveal a softer, more vulnerable side, one hidden deep beneath the polished surface the world expected him to wear. He never spoke of Freddie in public interviews, yet a quiet detail surfaced in a private document while he was choosing music for an intimate setting. Next to a Queen track, Michael simply circled the title and wrote, "He understands the weight I carry." Just one sentence, subtle, but powerful enough to suggest that some emotions were never meant for the spotlight. What do you think about the hidden friendships and unspoken connections surrounding icons like Michael? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy exploring rare, behind-the-scenes stories from music history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep these timeless narratives alive. Never assume Michael Jackson was always only quiet, distant, or sealed inside a world of shadows. There were moments rare, vivid, almost unreal when he, too, stepped toward something burning and unfiltered, like a soul drawn to light. No crowds, no stage, no spectacle. Only him and another presence. Sylvester James Jr., a disco force from San Francisco. Sylvester never asked for permission to be seen. He dared to sing, to exist loudly, to shine fully wild hair, glittering outfits, and a soaring falsetto that seemed to cut through every silent barrier society built. In that contrast, Michael found something hypnotic, a kind of fearless freedom that spoke without words. Sylvester was never someone who waited to be accepted. He made the world face his truth head-on. And according to those nearby, that fearless authenticity was exactly what drew Michael in. At the time, Michael was slowly stepping beyond the long shadow of the Jackson 5, drifting toward the disco scene not only in search of a new sound, but in search of something far deeper. Release, possibility, air to breathe, and perhaps, in that strange in-between space, he wasn't only discovering freedom, he was beginning to discover himself. While gathering inspiration for his first major work with Quincy Jones, Michael was said to quietly slip into underground clubs, places untouched by flashbulbs or applause, only pulsing bass, fractured lights, and endless motion, where the world dissolved into rhythm and anonymity. At Club Trocadero Transfer, a legendary haven for San Francisco's creative underground, several DJs later described witnessing a moment that felt almost unreal. Michael and Sylvester, without announcements, without fanfare, seemed to drift onto the dance floor in quiet synchronicity like two spirits recognizing something familiar in each other. Michael wore nothing dramatic, just a simple white shirt and jeans, yet his attention kept returning to Sylvester's untamed, radiant laughter. One choreographer who once worked alongside him recalled, "Sylvester was fearless, almost explosive. But beside Michael, he became strangely still nearly reverent, and Michael watched him the way someone watches fire, drawn in, unable to look away." After that night, quiet rumors began to ripple through the background that Michael would return to San Francisco more often than anyone expected, even renting a long-term place in Pacific Heights to remain close to a small circle of trusted souls. Sylvester was said to be among them, a familiar presence in those private hours. Staff members from the driver to the butler later recalled the same fragments. Nights filled with music that never seemed to end. Mornings wrapped in an almost sacred silence. No one could name what truly existed between them, friendship, fascination, or something too delicate to define. And in an unpublished page attributed to Michael, a handwritten title appeared, Private Star. Beneath it, words softened by time. He makes me feel like I can wear colors, even if just once. For Michael, so often surrounded by expectation, scrutiny, and the heavy weight of being a symbol, Sylvester embodied the opposite kind of existence. Daring to shine, daring to stand apart, daring to be unapologetically real. And perhaps it was that contrast that made their connection feel both dazzling like fireworks and fragile like smoke fading into the night. Some say Michael once invited Sylvester to record a quiet demo together, only piano, breath, and falsetto harmonies suspended in the air. Yet the track was never released, never spoken of. After Sylvester was gone, the recording vanished as well, believed to remain somewhere deep inside Michael's private archive, an echo of something too delicate for the world to hold. A music archivist once claimed that inside an old leather notebook, later seen at an auction, there was a single line in dark ink, as if written in the stillness of midnight. I can't move the way he does, but I know how to watch him, and it feels like dancing inside my heart. No one has ever confirmed who those words were meant for. Yet those who have heard whispers of this connection sense it was never just a casual encounter. It was something quieter, deeper, a silent storm moving through a man's inner world, leaving behind the faint scent of rain. The bond between Michael and Sylvester was never placed under public light, perhaps out of caution, or perhaps because some emotions, once exposed, lose the very tenderness that made them real. One lived within the boundaries the world demanded, while the other seemed to exist by breaking every rule without apology. They were like opposite ends of the same tension, two souls wrestling with what it truly means to be real. Someone once observed, Michael didn't only hide from the world, he hid from those who reflected the parts of himself he wasn't ready to confront. If that holds any truth, then Sylvester may have been the first and perhaps the only mirror strong enough to show him something undeniable. That the spotlight is not always the brightest place. That sometimes, in a shadowed corner beside someone brave enough to live freely, a heart can beat louder than any stage ever allowed. Long before the crown of pop was placed upon him, and long before fame became so intense it burned away the last untouched pieces of his private world. Freddie Mercury, a lasting symbol of resilience. No mirror can ever fully capture a soul, especially one so practiced at concealing its fractures. In the vivid universe of music, Freddie was far ahead of his era, a living flame that seemed to scorch through silent judgment. Yet behind the electrifying songs and performances blazing with intensity, there was also a solitary heart surrounded by endless applause, but still craving something quieter, something real. In the early 1980s, even as he stood as the spirit of Queen, Freddie was said to be drifting into an unseen emptiness, a space where fame could not reach and celebration could not truly comfort. His private world began to feel scattered and uncertain, something he once described as freedom, but lonely. And it was in that fragile season that he met Michael in a recording studio in Los Angeles. According to a longtime technician, it wasn't the first time their paths had brushed against each other, but it was the first time they truly noticed one another, not as icons, but as two human beings standing in the same quiet room. Freddie, usually quick with humor, suddenly grew uncharacteristically still. No jokes, no playful sparks, only a silence that suggested he sensed something deeper, something that could only be understood by listening rather than speaking. The song they recorded together, yet never officially released, has lingered like a quiet symbol of two solitary spirits briefly meeting in the same space. A close friend of Freddie once reflected, "Freddie never spelled it out. But that look, said there was something unspoken between them, like two kings recognizing they both carried an invisible crown. Even with his fearless reputation, Freddie never publicly explained what that connection meant, and when questions surfaced, he would only offer a gentle smile and whisper, "Some things are better left unsaid." Rumors suggest their connection may have fractured under the weight of their differences. Michael drawn toward privacy, order, and perfection, while Freddie lived with speed, intensity, and a kind of beautiful chaos. Some even tell a strangely humorous story that Freddie once missed a session after Michael raised a complaint about something as unexpected as his pet chimpanzee. It sounds almost absurd on the surface, yet perhaps these small details were never really about the surface at all. Sometimes people hide behind quirks and misunderstandings because the deeper truths feel too sharp to touch. For Freddie, not everyone was meant to witness what lay beneath the performance. And for Michael, maybe Freddie felt too familiar, like a reflection he wasn't prepared to face. Because when someone mirrors you too clearly, you're left with an impossible choice: step closer or disappear into the distance. There are bonds that resist definition. Not quite love, not quite friendship, just a quiet presence that steadies the heart. For Michael Jackson, Luther Vandross was said to be that kind of connection. Someone who brought a rare sense of calm in a life that never stopped demanding brilliance. Surrounded by flashing lights, relentless tours, and the constant weight of expectation, Michael often seemed suspended in a world where he was celebrated but not always understood. He was a phenomenon, an icon, the king of pop, yet so few ever truly saw him as simply Michael, a human being still searching for a place to rest. Luther was one of the very few who could offer that kind of stillness. A former bodyguard once recalled, there were nights when the two of them would sit by the piano, trading melodies that had no name. And once Michael whispered, "Don't record it, just remember it." Those moments weren't meant for cameras, fans, or contracts. They weren't created for albums or headlines, only for the quiet space between two artists, where silence carried more emotion than applause ever could. One studio staff member noted that Luther seemed most at ease beside Michael. Less guarded, less distant, just two black men moving through an industry that often demanded masks, finding in each other something rare, a piece of understanding they couldn't easily find anywhere else. Although he never confirmed anything publicly, Michael once reportedly told an assistant, "He makes me feel calm inside. I can't find that anywhere else." It was one of the rare moments where he spoke not about fame, but about refuge, about the quiet kind of safety that can't be bought or performed. After Luther passed away, a handwritten line was later said to appear in a notebook that surfaced at auction. "You taught me stillness. I never learned how to keep it." No one can truly verify who those words were meant for. But those who knew Michael understood that some goodbyes are not loud. They are written softly, like a final echo of something deeply real, something too delicate to survive under the harsh glare of the world. Luther Vandross, a timeless voice from another era, smooth as velvet, yet deeply private in a world that demanded revelation. While the soul and R&B scene of the 1980s saw many artists becoming more open about their personal lives, Luther chose quietness instead, partly by temperament, and partly because he understood how unforgiving the entertainment machine could be, especially for a black artist navigating its hidden pressures. He and Michael first crossed paths backstage at an event in New York in 1983. One music director later recalled that they barely spoke. They simply shook hands, holding on a moment longer than expected, almost as if they were recognizing each other from somewhere beyond memory, like two spirits meeting again after another lifetime. Since then, they were said to appear together in spaces untouched by cameras, private gatherings, anonymous studios, quiet late-night music sessions in a Manhattan apartment. Luther was never someone who displayed emotion loudly, but beside Michael, he didn't have to. Simply being there seemed to become its own kind of shelter for an artist who carried so much loneliness behind the fame. No one witnessed grand gestures, no embraces for the public, no hands held in the open. Yet sometimes a brief touch on the shoulder, a shared smile, a soft laugh in the dark was enough to leave others wondering, what was this, exactly? A friendship? A comfort? Or something too subtle to ever be named? A former friend of Luther once remarked, he didn't know how to stay close to someone who was never fully present. That haunting line may explain the quiet distance that slowly grew between them. Michael, over time, seemed to drift further into a world of escaped Neverland. Unusual routines, private fantasies that softened the harshness of fame. Luther, on the other hand, longed for something simpler, to remain grounded, to find stillness inside a life already loud enough. When asked about Michael, Luther never offered explanations. He only gave a small smile and chose silence, and for those who truly understood him, that silence spoke with more weight than any confession ever could. No one truly knows why they stopped being seen in the same spaces. It may have been time, emotional distance, shifting worlds, or simply because the fragile peace they once shared could not remain untouched. Yet in the years that followed, Michael was still said to quietly weave Luther's music into certain moments, almost like a wordless tribute, a soft recognition without explanation. Some connections don't require confirmation. They don't need labels, headlines, or permanence. They only need to be real enough to leave a mark deep enough to change us, gentle enough to help us endure, even if they exist only for a fleeting season. Before he became a global phenomenon, Michael was still a young man lingering for hours in quiet studios, places where sound felt pure and emotions hadn't yet been distorted by fame. And in that space, Jermaine Stewart seemed to enter softly, without demanding attention, like a gentle breeze passing through. Once a backup dancer for Shalamar, later a solo artist known for the hit "We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off," Jermaine carried a warmth that was difficult to describe. He wasn't someone who chased the center of the room. He was simply there, steady, understated, present in a way that made his tenderness feel even more powerful. Always smiling, always gentle, always keeping just enough distance as if a private world lived quietly behind his eyes. Michael noticed him from their very first meeting, not because Jermaine tried to shine, but because he never tried at all. They crossed paths in the late 70s, when Jermaine was still a young dancer, and Michael was suspended between two realities, growing fame and a deepening loneliness. According to a former Jackson family assistant, Jermaine was among the rare few who could make Michael laugh with nothing more than a look. He didn't flatter, didn't perform, and never treated him as Michael Jackson, only as Mike. One of them carried a kind of sincerity that never needed to prove itself, and slowly, their closeness became noticeable to those around them. Quiet dinners in a West Hollywood apartment, sitting side by side in the car backstage, long stretches of silence where no one spoke, yet everyone could feel something that didn't require words. A band member once remarked, "There's something unspoken between them that everyone on set notices. It's not loud, but it's always there." And in a memoir published in 2003 by a producer who worked closely with both, one line stood out. Michael found in Jermaine a closeness that asked for no explanations. No pressure, no expectations, just quiet calm. The entertainment world back then, though not as unforgiving as it would later become, was still a space where any hint of ambiguity could shatter a career, especially for two men of color. Michael was moving into the very center of American pop culture, a place that demanded perfection, control, and the careful hiding of anything too vulnerable. Jermaine understood that boundary deeply. He was soft in spirit, but never naive. He knew how cruel the world could be, and how limited emotional freedom often was beneath the spotlight. Nothing was ever made public. Nothing was ever defined. Yet those who were close to them believed Michael and Jermaine once shared something rare, a season of closeness that needed no label, carried no name, but remained sincere in its quiet privacy. If this story moved you or sparked your curiosity, feel free to leave a like to support the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with others who appreciate Michael Jackson and the untold emotional layers behind music history. Your support helps us continue exploring rare, meaningful, and deeply human stories about legendary artists. And if you'd like to stay with us for more exclusive content, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. They didn't need the world to define what their connection was, and perhaps that is exactly why it felt so real. No declarations, no spotlight, no performance. Just two people meeting in a rare pocket of stillness inside a chaotic life. To Jermaine, Michael wasn't an untouchable figure, only a person. And to Michael, Jermaine never had to prove anything, because his quietness alone was already a kind of comfort. It was the sort of bond Michael rarely seemed to find again. Later on, when studios were no longer dusty and intimate, when emotions became polished, packaged, and sold like products. Between Sylvester, burning bright like a flame, and Jermaine, gentle as a cool breeze, Michael once stood somewhere in between, choosing neither, yet carrying a piece of both within him. Not loud, not dramatic, just two individuals able to sit in a small room listening to the same song for hours without needing a single word. Once, in a diary line indirectly quoted at a European exhibition about Michael, a sentence in blue ink was read aloud. "I feel like I can breathe when he is in the room. I don't need to perform, just exist." Many believe those words were meant for Jermaine Stewart. But moments like that, quiet, fragile, untouched by the world, were never destined to last forever. In a handwritten production note left behind, there was only one quiet line. "He taught me how to sit in silence without feeling out of place." Not every connection needs photographs, songs, or explanations. Some bonds are like ink sinking into paper, no one watches it spread, yet everyone knows it has settled there forever. For Michael and Jermaine, perhaps all they ever needed was a brief moment of peace, a small corner untouched by the spotlight, where they could simply exist as themselves before the storm of fame arrived, erasing the most private spaces first. No blame, no grasping, no dramatic ending, just the soft truth that some memories do not fade, even when the world moves on. No one would expect Michael Jackson, the world's most luminous superstar, endlessly chased by cameras and admiration, to find any kind of connection with Jean-Michel Basquiat, the untamed street artist who transformed New York's walls into chaotic inner landscapes of symbols, color, and unrest. One lived through music, the other through paint. One was guarded and withdrawn, the other fueled by instinct and rebellion. Yet sometimes, the most restless souls recognize something familiar in each other, without ever needing to explain it aloud. Around 1984, as Thriller placed Michael at the absolute summit of pop culture, and Basquiat was still regarded with suspicion by the art elite, Andy Warhol was said to be the first to hint that Michael should pay attention to that guy. At a Soho exhibition, Michael reportedly appeared unexpectedly. No entourage, no cameras, no spectacle, just one man moving quietly through color and chaos. He stopped for a long time before a nearly black canvas marked with the words, "I don't belong here." A gallery staff member later recalled that he stood there for more than half an hour, silent, fingertips resting gently on the frame, as if trying to understand the painting not with his eyes, but with something deeper. After the exhibition, Michael and Jean were reportedly seen leaving together, stepping into a black limousine, and then vanishing into the city's night. No one knew where they went, but soon, whispers began to circulate through the art world, that they spent evenings without music, without paint, just two men sitting in stillness, speaking about what it feels like to be watched, misunderstood, turned into an image before anyone ever asks if you wanted to become one. A visual artist who once knew Basquiat recalled, "Jean was always drawn to the sadness in others. But with Michael, it was different. He once said, I feel like I'm watching myself cry in his reflection. A sadness so deep it almost becomes luminous loneliness wrapped in a strange kind of halo. Perhaps that was the invisible thread that drew them together. Michael never publicly spoke of any connection, yet a quiet anecdote continues to drift through creative circles. In an unused stage concept, Michael once asked for a set that felt like the structure of an unfinished painting, where nothing truly ends, only shifts. Some believe the idea was inspired by Jean's work, and when Jean-Michel passed away at just 27, Michael did not appear at the funeral. No statements, no public grief. But months later, during a performance, something unexpected happened. At the very end of the encore, Michael stood motionless as the lights slowly dimmed. Behind him, a single line appeared on the screen, one the audience didn't know how to interpret. Some colors don't fade, they hide. No one has ever confirmed what that line truly meant. But once again, those who understand simply feel it. Basquiat once said, "I am not a real person. I am a legend woven by someone else." Michael never needed to speak those words aloud. He carried them in his gaze, in the weight of his posture, in the careful way he moved through crowds, as if trying not to be seen. And perhaps only Jean, the one who painted pain in color, recognized it completely. They were not lovers. They were not lifelong friends. They were simply two echoes inside the same cave, meeting briefly when the outside world was too loud for either of them to hear themselves. Those who were close to Michael during 1985-1986 often recalled that something shifted inside him quietly, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't anger or sorrow, but a new kind of silence, as if it had taken form. One producer noted that Michael began carrying a notebook everywhere, yet it was no longer filled with lyrics or melodies, but with strange, fragmented sketches, shapes that felt more like emotion than art. On one page, written in purple ink, there was a single line. "He is so messy, but it makes sense. For a moment I wished I could be that messy too." A thought that sounded less like admiration and more like longing for a kind of freedom he rarely allowed himself. Basquiat, in contrast, never concealed his chaos. In several works from that period, observers have pointed to symbols that seem to echo Michael's world: a single white glove, a pair of high heels, and most striking of all, a cracked mask. When asked about it, Basquiat reportedly only smiled and said, "I met a king who didn't know he was bleeding." Nothing more was ever spoken. They did not move further, did not turn it into a story the world could hold. If a connection existed, it remained like a scratch across the nightlight, enough not to break the skin, yet deep enough to never fully disappear. Michael returned to tours, studios, and the relentless duties of superstardom, while whatever had flickered in that brief intersection quietly faded back into silence. Basquiat kept plunging into sleepless nights, painting unrest in color and noise. Yet his influence did not entirely vanish. In an internal meeting while shaping the concept for the Bad Tour, Michael reportedly mentioned street art, graffiti, and indistinct figures. Early stage sketches even carried traces of Basquiat's raw visual language, though the idea was eventually set aside. After Jean's death, Michael offered only silence. No public tribute, no statements, no written farewell, just absence. And sometimes, silence is not emptiness, but the only way certain echoes are allowed to remain. But backstage at an art event in New York, when a critic once asked Michael what he thought of the late artist, he quietly replied, "There are people who paint pain so deeply, it makes you feel your own pain more softly." No one knows exactly who those words were meant for, yet those who witnessed them standing near each other even only once seemed to understand something unspoken. It wasn't friendship in the usual sense, it wasn't love, it was simply a brief, silent collision between two restless souls, before each drifted back into their own solitude. No one would expect Michael Jackson and George Michael, two towering names from different corners of pop history, to share anything beyond professional admiration. Yet those who look closely sense another kind of connection, quiet, private, unnamed, existing only in the brief glances exchanged when cameras aren't watching. George Michael once said, "Fame gives you everything, except love." And if you've ever imagined Michael stepping into an empty room after the applause fades, you can understand just how painfully true that might be. Since the mid-1980s, quiet rumors have lingered, not the loud, tabloid kind, but the softer stories that travel between artists. They never truly collaborated in any official way, aside from a few invitations that never became reality. Yet what stood out most was the way they spoke of each other. Carefully, slowly, as if every word carried something beneath it. In a 1991 interview, when asked about George, Michael simply smiled and said, "His voice is amazing, very sensitive." For someone who often kept his feelings hidden behind control and polish, it wasn't an ordinary compliment. It felt like a rare recognition, one artist noticing something fragile and real in another. According to a London DJ, George was invited to Neverland not just once. No one truly knows what was said there, or what passed between them in those private hours. No photos, no headlines, no official traces, only the lingering weight of quietness. Some claim that after one visit, George seemed more inward, more reflective, as if something had shifted beneath the surface. A producer close to him once recalled, "After a show, George had a drink and said very softly, 'Michael understands silence better than anyone else.'" No one pressed him. He offered no explanation, but his expression in that moment suggested something had opened, like a door that had been locked for far too long. George Michael was among the first artists to dare to live more openly, and he carried the weight of scrutiny and misunderstanding for years. Michael did not. Despite endless speculation, he never confirmed anything, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of protection, perhaps simply because some parts of a life cannot survive exposure. Someone who worked behind the scenes with both once said, "They didn't need to speak it. Just their presence in the same moment was enough for the world to sense something quiet, almost like an instrumental piece playing underneath everything." No one truly knows what existed, if anything at all, but if you've ever listened to Michael sing "Stranger in Moscow" and imagined George Michael standing silently in the backstage glow, you can understand the feeling that somewhere, beyond words, they may have recognized each other, deeply, quietly, and with a kind of sadness that fame never knows how to heal. If anything ever existed between them, it may have been nothing more than an emotion living quietly in unnamed silences. After George Michael passed away in 2016, someone from his longtime production circle once reflected they shared a private understanding, like two lonely giants of pop. It's the kind of statement that doesn't demand proof, because sometimes the deepest connections are the ones that remain unspoken, untouched by explanation. Michael Jackson spent much of his life beneath relentless scrutiny, burdened by projections, rumors, and the weight of expectations tied to race, identity, and the strange narratives the world placed upon him. And perhaps, no matter how bright the stage became, he never fully stepped out of the shadow others created. George Michael, who faced harsh judgment simply for trying to live honestly, understood that kind of loneliness in a way few others could. They came from different worlds, different cultures, different continents, yet, in some sense, they stood on the same invisible battlefield. Artists who lived for music, but often had to live in silence. A former member of George's dance circle once joked softly, "George and Michael may not have shown anything to the cameras, but I can imagine them sitting in a room together, listening to the quiet, saying nothing for a long time." No one knows if that was ever true, but the image itself, two figures in the twilight of Neverland, surrounded by stillness, not performing, not explaining, feels strangely beautiful. beautiful enough that part of us almost wants to believe it. A quiet legend drifts through George Michael's most devoted fan circles, that during a visit to Los Angeles, he once left behind an unfinished demo at a friend's home. The working title was Echoes. Those who claim to have heard fragments describe it as soft and melancholic, like a fragile cloud passing through dusk. The lyrics, barely more than a whisper, feel as though they are speaking to someone absent, someone never named. The recording was never officially released, yet some listeners believe it carried the weight of a farewell George never openly explained. And if any feeling ever existed between them, it was never something loud or dramatic. It would have been the kind of emotion that needed no declaration, no validation, no label, only silence, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the deepest things are the ones left untouched by words. It exists like a soft breeze moving through the grand musical worlds they once inhabited. Perhaps only a glance, a quiet presence backstage, a hand resting briefly on a shoulder, a message never sent. But for those who spend their lives under suspicion and projection, having even one person who truly understands can be enough. Michael Jackson and George Michael, two icons, two unfinished stories, a connection never confirmed, never denied, something that may have lived only in passing moments, yet lingered long after the applause disappeared. And perhaps that is the purest form of private affection, not what the world can name, but what the heart quietly carries when the lights go out. It was never something meant to be hidden, only something that didn't need interrogation. Because a heart, whether belonging to a legend or an ordinary soul, beats with the same quiet truth, unseen yet undeniable. Even beneath the brightest stage lights, there are corners of life that remain private, understood only by those who have lived them. 6 names, 6 stories, whether rumors, brief encounters, or deeper emotional echoes, have formed a portrait of Michael Jackson rarely shown to the world. Not the icon, not the spectacle, but a fragile, genuine human presence, still yearning, like anyone else, to be understood. Amidst the glory, triumph, and deep isolation that fame can bring, perhaps what Michael Jackson was truly searching for was never a throne, but simply someone who could sit beside him in silence and understand. This story is not here to confirm or deny anything. It is only an invitation to look at these icons not through speculation, but through empathy. Because beyond the lights, beyond the legends, they were still human beings just searching, like all of us, for a small place of peace. If these untold stories resonated with you, feel free to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Together, we can continue exploring the quiet, deeply human layers hidden behind timeless music legends. Thank you for spending your time with this video. If you found it meaningful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss our future daily uploads. And now, you can check out more fascinating videos appearing on your screen.